eventually a middle school principal. I then was a secondary curriculum director, transitioned and became really a director of educational technology. Then took over all the assessment and data and eventually IT. And then now I've been the assistant soup in San Jacinto Unified School District for the last, this is the start in March of my 5th year there. So just to give you a little context, because my experience has kind of crossed everything from elementary, teaching and learning up into middle, and then eventually the secondary model as a director. I didn't bring my team today, truthfully, because you're very brave, Coachella. It was affirming to hear what you're doing, but because then we steal principals. So I was thinking, if I brought my team, you're going to go, oh, there's a person we want to tap on. I'm already protecting the county from one of my people because I know in the end they want to take them. Our mission statement, right, is that we provide equity and access for each and every student while developing cultural responsibility, right? Cultural responsiveness and social responsibility. And so this is something that's been in place in our district for a little while. Our prior superintendent actually put us through a process to develop this mission. What I'm going to be doing today is really trying to connect it to 3 big ideas. So as a district level administrator, as an assistant soup of educational services, I definitely have an instructional lens, but I view my role is to create that structure for procedures to be able to occur very efficiently. And in the end, we're trying to change behavior in a positive way. So I'm not sure if anyone, by show of hands, anyone participated in NISL in the past? So these are the big ideas that come out of NISL, which is a very improvement science research-based program and professional learning that helps you kind of connect all these big dots. So the structure is how you leverage compliance designation and create a structure to support school-wide or district-wide implementation. I don't see anything that came from compliance as a bad thing. Process, what process do you put in place to increase the capacity of educators so they're poised to support increased outcomes for students? That's our overall goal, right? We want to see increased student outcomes. And then what are those outcomes, right? Are you measuring? So this is, learning for me as I've gotten deeper in my career is we're measuring both implementation, meaning am I doing it consistently? Then you get into quality control. Am I doing it in a way that actually it's high quality? Then you get into, am I actually able to measure it through a fidelity inventory? So can I really go in and say, I knew exactly what you're doing and the reason why, and I'm giving you feedback that it worked positively or not. That's where I spend pretty much the majority of my time. Our district is about 10,000 kids. You can see the dashboard here. If it's like any of your current environments or contexts, the bottom line is we're all seeing a decline. We have a lot of areas that we need to address. This isn't new for our district. So back from 2019, I love this report, which you can't get yet from the state, but the group report. I did highlight we've been students with disabilities for 3+++. I don't know. The pluses keep adding on at this point because we're in the orange and red. We were actually for homeless back in 2019, and then now with the new dashboard, it's shifted over to foster youth. So we have those 2 particular areas that we are in differentiated assistance as a district that we are working with Riverside County on. It gets better. We are also in compliance and improvement monitoring as a district. So we went through a process and are currently involved with Jordan from Riverside County SELPA, where we have done this process looking at our overall system, the way we support our students with disabilities. We know in the end, our students with disabilities, we over-identify students for eligibility. The particular areas we over-identify African-American males into like an ED or self-contained program. And we're in year 1 of that, or level 1, which is really a 3-year process if anyone's not involved in that. Here's the areas why that is happening. I already talked about the particular reason why, but there's multiple. And wait, there's more. It's like an infomercial. We know that right now we went through an FPM from the federal government on Title III. We actually went through FPM in all of our categorical programs. We've been told we will have an on-site visit on Title I this next year. You can see the areas highlighted here where we have, there's 15 different areas for Title III. We were out of compliance in 8. Our superintendent had to write assurances for 6. When I came into the district in 2019, there was not an English learner division or department. So one of the first things I did is shift, and I created, as through attrition, that was my first hire, was I needed to hire someone that could come in and lead English learners because we are 20%. So 1 in 5 kids, we're at 18% right now of students with disabilities. So as I've shared with principals, I'm looking at basically 2 out of 5 kids looking back. Do you have additional needs beyond what you would consider the general needs of students? We have a board that has both mixture of some new members and some long-standing members. We just went through an election in November, obviously, and had a shift in one of our board members. You can see the goals here. Ultimately, they want to see kids reading. They want to see that it's an engaging environment and that we have safe and inclusive learning environments and facilities. And then the vision at top, we want our students to become college and career ready, regardless of which option they choose going through our district. So that left me pondering. Well, the district that's very focused on equity, the district that has a very clear mission, a district that has very clear vision and values, why are we not getting results? Like at the end of the day, right, this is easy. We bought all the programs that they tell me will fix it, and we've tried to implement them, and yet I haven't found that magic potion yet because our results are still showing what they do. So I share with all of my district that this is me. I walk this fine line all the time. I'm trying to balance between commitment and compliance because it's so easy to fall into do it because I said so versus do it because it's right for kids. Do it because the data leads you there. Don't do it because you really like it, right? And that is a really hard pill to swallow because at the end of the day, if I love that program or I love this consultant, I will pay them millions. And I find that doesn't really lead us very far. It's really about using the compliance and not be top down to build commitment. And where we're really trying to build commitment right now is around we have to improve our quality first instruction. So that's that QFI. I know a lot of times it's best first instruction, and that's a term that I've used for most of my career, but now it's about quality for me because I want high quality first instruction. Every day of the year, I asked principals just this week, I said, how many days out of the 180 that you're contracted for do you want to not provide quality first instruction? Tell me the days and I'll take them off the calendar because at the end, we should be doing it for 180 days a year. This is a little bit of my journey. It looks like a lot, but I'm just wanted to kind of send the message of there's a progression. When I came in the district in 2019, the focus was on taking action from Solution Tree. And if you've read that book, it really talks about in the end, you go through 13 different modules and you're really saying, how am I going to create my tier 2 and my tier 3 environment for my students that are not being successful? But I feel that everyone kind of glosses over, what do you do at tier 1? Because if that's not working well, then I am intervening for kids that really I should have addressed when they were in their primary classroom. We really, at that time in the fall, we wanted to focus on a very small number of goals. We wanted to really focus on mindset because what we're realizing is you have these conversations, you're hitting that wall pretty quickly if people have a philosophy or a core value that's different than really servicing each and every student. We changed the mission to not be all because I was definitely one of those kids that would have got lost in the all, even though you look at me and you think, okay, yes, I see that. But if you don't really know each person's story and if you don't really know what they're going through, you're probably not going to address their needs. Then, of course, right, COVID hit and just kind of made that chaos. Those who have done this will know about VUCA, right? So volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And what that really helps us learn is that you need leaders that are agile and dynamic, that can basically respond regardless of what's happening at their school, which to me means you need those critical thinkers. You need people to have high capacity. So I heard that earlier in the other presentation. We developed what's called the core essentials, which was really for us our first stage into trying to define what would make up quality first instruction. So you can see it there. It's learning data, standards and skills, research-based strategies, which we've now changed to evidence-based strategies, and then our core curriculum. Anyone know why we wanted to distinguish between research-based versus evidence-based strategies?
That's because there's research doesn't necessarily mean there's.
Very good, because for me, I started to realize you could go and do it in a lab, and you do it in a real class with 30 kids yelling and screaming and kicking each other. And if you can't, then it's probably not a practice that I'd want to adapt. We really, during COVID, is anybody a Schitt's Creek watcher in here? Yeah. Alina ain't hang out, obviously. So, because what happened was we were really at that point saying that it's about literacy, literacy, literacy. And in that show, there's a mother and a son team, and they're trying to teach each other how to cook a recipe. So when I've gone out and done these site visits, I started talking about, I'd use that fold in the cheese because they're like, how do I make this? And part of the step in the recipe is fold in the cheese. And the mother's like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, I don't know, show me. And they never get to what it means to fold in the cheese. They just keep saying, fold it in, fold it in, fold it in. So we realized when we were saying it's a focus on literacy, everyone's like, you're telling me to fold in the cheese. I have no idea what you mean. So then we started to narrow it down a little bit where we had very specific strategies inside of literacy that we wanted to focus on. So we used our data to guide us to the small group reading instruction approach at the elementary, which I'm going to talk about a little bit more, and then close reading strategies really that we adapted to be both the math on the other side of the coin. And we really, it's about this, if we're going to talk all kids, right, each and every student, then how does that look in the classroom? Now, this last couple of years, we've really narrowed it down even further. Our data has driven us to that when you look across iReady, I don't know how many of you iReady, we use that domain, we matched it with the prior data of COVID. We find that we're very focused on vocabulary right now as part of the reading rope because it's standard 1.4, which goes across all levels. So, and that standard actually unpacks exactly the strategy you should be using. That's where we're at. This is another picture just I wanted to highlight missile. I did want to highlight, I can't remember if it comes up later enough, this slide right here. One of the pieces for me, if I have 1 in 5 kids being an English learner, language is a connecting block of the academic, social, emotional behavior. If you're not able to use language, then you probably aren't accessing those other 3 areas as well. I think attendance is another connecting block. So here's a breakdown of the 4 core standards or 4 core essentials that we talked about. And the goal with this was really, we want to give feedback. So what are we giving feedback on? Is it intentional? Or am I coming in and saying your bulletin boards are beautiful, right? And yet your bulletin boards can be beautiful and people might not be able to read. So we have really spent a lot of time in our district on not only improvement science, but now really focusing on implementation science. So what that means to me is if you can't actually do it correctly, consistently, that's probably where our gap is. We've done a lot of activities, understanding that implementation is not an event. It's a specific set of activities designed to put in practice an activity or program. These are stages that you go through that overlap in time. So just because you think your diet's good and you've lost a little bit of weight, you can easily start to eat bad again. And then you're like, whoa, I got to go back and rethink what I'm doing. It's that same type process for me. I heard Plan, Do, Study Act talked about earlier, which is a similar, it's embedded within implementation science. Here's the 4 stages of implementation science. I'm not going to go deeply into it because that's not the focus, but if you're interested in it, you can find the website there from NERN. They have modules that most of my team has started to go through because it makes a lot of sense when you start thinking, how do I put something in place to make sure it sticks? We tend to think that we're fully implemented with something. Most time when you actually use one of the tools to start to analyze, you find out you're really back in exploration or installation. You never actually took a step to implementation. And I can give examples across probably my district and yours when I start talking about a program we purchased, PLC, teacher clarity, on and on, because we haven't taken the time to really go through and make sure we've hit all of those stages of implementation. Right now, we're talking a lot about a usable innovation, and my worry with this is people think it needs to be something new. So they're saying, again, what's that program we're going to buy or that strategy we're going to do? And I'm saying my usable innovation is quality first instruction, because it should be evidence-based. It needs to be teachable, learnable, doable, and readily assessed in practice. And if we're not doing all of those things, we are not implementing. We are unpacking what's the clear description of the program, what's the program components, how do you operationalize those program components, and then do you develop an actual fidelity assessment or inventory, I prefer that word, where you come through and evaluate and then give feedback in a very constructive way. So I'm spent a little bit of time here only because I wanted you to understand how the journey went from chasing a program or a consultant, and we're now very invested into, we need to take the time to do the work collectively, not only our ed services, but with our principals, because we cannot lead from the central office, no matter what anybody tells you. So we started a while back on what I call financial MTSS, so tiered, because when I came in connecting it to the school plan, I found most of my principals were operating under the district made a decision. They would write the plan for the schools, and then they were implementing what was in there. And I was like, I'm the opposite, lead from the middle. So we talked about what does funding actually support? Riverside County actually worked with me on doing a assessment of all of our plans. And we started having conversations about the misalignment and the need for what is base. So base is everything that you're doing, even if all the funding falls apart, right? You have to have that. If you define that more clearly, now you can talk about LCAP and LCFF and you can say what's supplemental. So what am I doing that's very intentional based on my district-wide data? So I'm applying this for either all of my district, maybe it's a targeted or a specific student group, but it's very supplemental. And from a principal site, right, you're targeted. So can you take the things that the district is doing and actually extend them at your school? And what now is connected to your local data at your school. So we wanted it to be very understood that there's a through line here that should be happening. If the base is not defined at the district, it's harder to create the targeted supports because then you start chasing things that are a little outside the lane. We talked a lot about the plan alignment because we wanted to be able to provide, here's what we're doing as a district, here's what we're doing as in the LCAP, here's what some ideas are for you to do for your CSI. They should focus on what will be different for the identified need, not just providing more of the same. So I saw a lot of school plans that said, we want to provide additional collaboration time. And my response has been to do what? Because we already provide collaboration as part of our daily schedule. So you have to be much more intentional and targeted with what you're doing with that time, not just something that you're doing because you want to provide more. We did basically a snapshot that tried to help the principals and really all of our educational partners as well see the way that our LCAP was designed. I know different districts have done different parts of this. The reason it was important to me is if you look under goal 1, which is really mine, and you remember back to those 4 core essentials, we aligned the LCAP to those same big categories. So you see at the top, learning data, then you see curriculum. There used to be other parts, but we found that those areas really are base. Then you get into direct student support. We have pulled out English learners. We talk about ed tech because that is the magic button for everything, right? And then what are all those support positions? And I changed the makeup of the LCAP to where they weren't all embedded within, mainly because you start to get into a funding nightmare when you're trying to do all of those things in an action. And what I found is we would budget $1.2 million in extra duty and not spend it. And it was spread throughout all of these actions. And I said, really what we want to do is pull it out and make it its own area, right? Because then it's easier to track and monitor for reporting purposes in that area. Now we've actually pulled it out because what we do is all that one-time funding. We're finding that it's easier to use that to pay all the extra duty and to focus more on these being supplemental resources. We created basically a simplified version of the CSI because I found if you're like me, templates get very confusing. And when I do the LCAP, I think they're going to change it again. When I look at the school plan, I think there's a lot of pages that really don't matter. In the end, I want to know from a principal, what's your budget? When are we coming to check? What are you focusing on professional learning, which now we've changed to even less about PD and more about capacity building. What's your goal? And then you can see each column. So have you identified the specific need? Have you analyzed your data? Not regurgitated your data because I can find that on the dashboard. Have you identified what the real resource and equity is? Because chances are what should be there is something that's not currently present. We have an alternative school. Their identified need is basically that they are in different or not CSI. They were in CSI. For English, math, and college career indicator. There's no way for them to meet that college career indicator because most of their students come as seniors. They've already taken the 11th grade. And they really aren't going to be students, truthfully, unfortunately, that are going to pass an AP or an IB exam. So then we knew we had to focus it to a CTE program. Well, similar to something I heard earlier, I would hear, well, there's no resource in equity. So I said, show me your CTE program. Because right now the students don't have access to that at the school. So there is my resource and equity. So my plan should be very intentional and targeted to addressing that in some way, shape, or form. Then you get into the action. How's it going to be measured by? I loved in your presentation, you talked about progress monitoring. I think that is something that everyone thinks they understand, but yet at the same time, our practice is very inconsistent with how we really monitor what we're implementing. That's where that fidelity inventory comes in. If I've defined it, it's much easier for me to go back through and look at whether or not it's happening the way I intend. make sure you spend your money, everybody. And then the last part for me is, how do you connect to family? So I've shared with site principals that in the end, if I'm going to focus on pick your poison, and I'm going to focus on that, and I'm going to, like right now in our district, we're saying we're focused on a specific vocabulary strategy. Not because we abandon anything else, but we're going to get really good at this. Then your parent event should be training the parents how it's done, right? Provide them the resources, give them everything they need so that they can actually be another support to you at home with how you're going to do that at school. Then show them the data of how they're monitoring it. Give them something to put in their refrigerator so they're starting to talk about the goal setting with their children. So for me, it's just take the one idea and build your comprehensive plan. Your comprehensive plan isn't 100 ideas. It's one idea done in 100 different ways. My role at the district office is to align resources. So we realized intervention is not working very well. We had pockets of excellence. So I want to be clear. We had some people through natural talent and ability were making huge shifts with individual kids by being an intervention teacher. But it wasn't systemic for our district. So when we went through compliance and improvement monitoring, what we were found for is we didn't have consistency in our system across the district. So I'm one that feels we need to pull it back, and then we're going to rethink that. So right now what we have is we've created 2 new positions. We created a Title I PD specialist because money was not being spent completely at the schools. So we've created a centralized approach where there's very targeted support from those positions. And then we created an MTSS specialist, which is their goal, that's a different funding source, is to actually be a resource at the school where they will think of the system. So how are we really responding to the needs of kids? What's our criteria, entrance and exit, who's providing it? Because to me, it's not about where the kid is at, it's about who's providing the service. So if they need both supplemental or intensified supports, it's about the person and the time, not the location. So that's what they're working on. This is in development. We're nearing the end of our first year. I spent time, I went and spoke to every single school in our district to do staff meetings. I basically presented our current data, talked about our current reality, talked about the vision of where we want to go to, tried to help them understand the alignment of the resources from the district office so they didn't think we were making decisions just because I liked it, and really tried to ground it in the data pieces. So that was time that I think was well spent. Really wanted to zone in on our first commitments of quality first instruction, which is if anyone's a teacher clarity type district, we want to see a very clear learning intention because it's research or evidence-based that it works. If you know what you're learning, you're probably going to pay attention and actually be able to get there. A success criteria. So I am a little stickler on this of compliance because this is an equity piece for me. I am learning because it personalizes it. I can because then it is actually outcome based. So I can actually show you what I'm doing and explain my learning. We are a district that has not used core as designed. So that's a piece that we're still having discussions around. And then we have done a lot of training on what you see in the consistent model for learning, but not seeing it in implementation. What we've done since then, so we have, this is one of our alternative high school. They spent last year working with the county and going through, I believe it was 12 days, right, of support, where it was really trying to dig in and invest and do the root cause and go through a plan to study X cycle. And then we were doing days on the side. I think they had 6 days of support from the district internally that we did. The school did not exit CSI. So we are still now, I think we're on day 2 of a new 6-day, right? But we find that, you know, this wasn't a learning piece for me. Sometimes it just takes longer for it to be a connection. So I'm willing to invest the time and make that commitment if I know in the end it's increasing the capacity of the individual leaders. This is one of the plan, do, study acts. I just wanted to go back to this one for a second because if all this is not familiar to you, that's obviously a great resource from the county. It actually most of the time also connects to professional learning communities. So it's all of that is still grounded in the same idea of that plan, do, study, act model. This is some work from when we worked with Jordan from SELPA. So you can see at this point we were doing an activity where we then get into the primary drivers. We had not done the initiative mapping yet, which I know the team's done that. I heard that mentioned in your presentation. We're already planning that because we find that that's where our big breakdown we're seeing right now is a misalignment between the district and the schools. So because I say it's important, it's not important to everybody, right? Because at the end of the day, their local context changes that. So how do we have the conversation together to really define what's important for both of us so that we're moving in the same direction? In that planning, this is where we ended up, which remember one of my big ideas was how do you leverage the compliance to move in the direction that you really want to go? So implement a systematic district and site-wide multi-tiered system of supports process. So basically, that's what we were finally able to really sit at the table and put some egos aside and people to say, we really don't have a consistent system for kids. So we have to build it. So we've created a 3-year timeline for us to do that. And then provide training and resources for quality first instruction. So at the end of the day, we have to stop chasing the supplemental and intensified supports until we can verify for sure that kids are getting what they need day in and day out. So it's led to this. So we have a vision. It's to provide daily culturally responsive, high quality first instruction, including integrated and designated ELD for English learners in every classroom for each and every student. The reason that we include that designated and integrated ELD in our vision and very transparently is because one of our findings in FPM was that we were not doing it. And I find that even if I think, okay, I get designated ELD, it's not happening in the classroom, right? So maybe they go to a specific teacher and they're getting those supports, but then are they bridging over and doing that integrated throughout their daily curriculum? So we wanted to make sure that was super clear. Why focus on first instruction? While you would think like everyone's like, yes, what it was is then a lot of the criticism has been, but John is not learning. And what are we doing for John while you figure all this out? And yet at the same time, if we really believe the research, what we're going to find is that if you're over 50% showing red, it's not a tier 2 or 3 issue. It's a primary classroom day in, day out concern. So if I can't intervene for 65% of my kids. I have to address what's going on in the first class. That's where kids spend the majority of their time. I struggle with a pull-out intervention model. I'm a very inclusive believer. When I work with people, I like to say that's a core value. So if you're going to come in and discuss what you think should be done separate for our special ed kids, I'm going to tell you, nope, tell me how it's going to be done inside the classroom. And don't put them all the way at the back of the campus. Please move them forward. Instructional leadership. So in the end, we're responsible. I take my responsibility very serious. I believe it's my moral obligation and responsibility to be spending my days really creating that structure and then giving feedback in the different levels of the organization. So trying to walk the walk as well. So what's some of that success criteria for what we're doing? I can provide a clear description of quality first instruction. I did an activity where I've asked my principals, I give them each an index card and I ask them to respond to something like that. Like, what's my vision? And then when I see inconsistency, I know I haven't done a good enough job because there should be that consistent response. I can identify the essential elements of quality first instruction. I can explain the operational definition. So if we're going to say we're going to do iReady because it's part of our learning data, and we say it's for kids K through 8, and we say that it's going to do A, B, and C, then does that really mean we're doing it? We want to be able to go out and say in practice, yes. Proctoring, what do you mean? Sitting at your desk while the kids are taking a test? No, that's not active proctoring. So we are in the very technical stage of our work where we want to define what is best practice across the board. I can conduct a practical performance inventory for each essential element. So in other words, can we come through and say, yes, it's there, partially there, not there. Let's talk about that. So for some instructional leadership, I can identify and model specific strategies. I'm a big believer as principal. This is, again, one of my own beliefs. It's critical that you stand in front of your staff and actually lead PD. So even if I don't do it perfectly, I'd rather stand in front and model it and then say, look, I'm learning too. Let's learn together. Let's model it, join a PLC group, and let's go through it together. I can monitor implementation. Are you really walking an hour a day? We know that doesn't work. So we're working with principals to say, schedule your walkthroughs very intentionally. Which classes are you walking? What time during the day? Plan it ahead of time. Have your secretaries put it on your calendar and then stick to it. Because if you think it's going to be, well, the first hour of the day, we all know teachers learn very quickly when you're walking, right? And where? So show me the evidence in a sense that you're really walking all of your schools, all of your classrooms. You're being intentional throughout the course of the day so that no one's missing out. I can provide intentional feedback through both formal informal and formal interactions. Another finding for FPM, for those of you who've been through it, it's lots of fun because they basically start to identify. So we're going to look at certain kids, we're going to look at their data, and then where we had a lot of fun was they said, now show us the teacher evaluations for the kids that they're in their class. And what they wanted to look for was, did they see, we planned for the PD, we walked and observed the PD, and then we actually gave feedback to the teacher. And of all the ones that were pulled for us, we could not provide any evidence that the teacher received feedback in a very intentional way. So it's our understanding and belief that that needs to happen. So if I'm going to focus on vocabulary for reading right now, and I've trained you on it, I better come through and give you feedback on whether or not you're doing it. And I want it to be in a very non-biased way, which is where the fidelity inventory comes in, because now I'm doing it based on, we agreed this should be happening, and it's not, right? Or we agreed this should be happening, it's partially happening. What resources and support can I provide you to get you all the way to full implementation? And then this is a big one for me. I can align my PD and other resources to support that improvement. I know we all have our passion projects, but if the passion project isn't aligned to the data and to what the students need, then to me, I think we have to find ways to do that in other ways and really align all of our resources, human capital, programs we buy, time I'm spending extra for, ultimately back to improving that quality first instruction. I know it's taking hold because this is an example that was not even led by me or the Riverside County Office of Education, where I now have a secondary director who has put together a very intentional team of, I think it's 12 different teachers from the high school. We have an extremely high failure rate in English, basically English 10, English 2 it's called, right? Math 2, and world history. And if you are at the secondary level or have influence over the secondary level, I highly encourage you to look at world history. Been doing data for a long time. It tends to be a gatekeeper of kids and we don't see it. World history fails a lot of kids historically. So they are now going through the process. They've had day one where they've conducted their fishbone and they've done a root cause analysis. They're excited to go back and use the initiative mapping now to basically say, what does that look like and where's the level of support? Because they want to get to a true plan, do, study act with this team of teachers. And that way it's actually something that teachers are owning. They're owning the data, they're owning the actions, and then they can lead that with the principal at the school versus it being, hey, district office identified, need to do more of this, and then we're back into compliance. So this is where I landed, our next steps. And not knowing how many people are NISL people, they have a different graphic, but this is, I'm like, I talk a lot, probably more than I should as a leader. I probably should listen more, but I talk because I feel part of my role is to continue to try to build connections and spread the vision. And ultimately, my role as assistant soup is to spread the vision of the board. So if they're saying that they want to see kids reading, I know it's my responsibility to work with cabinet and say I'm leading kids learning to read. And they're not going to learn it on a computer. They're going to learn it from an adult who knows how to teach reading. We know, now as educational services, it's been a journey and we're not there yet. So I don't think anything's like perfect, where it's pretty clunky still. But at the end, when you take really, really effective principals and move them into a district level position, where do we want to navigate to? We go back to where we were successful as principals. And it's shifting the mindset there. It's my role to build the structures and supports for the principal to become effective. Not for me to go in and say, I'm an effective principal, let me show you how I did it, to help lead a principal to be super effective. So that's where we're at. We're at a point where we really want to build and model those best practices. We've created a response to intervention matrix, the system, right, which includes quality first instruction. And then we have defined stages of going through an actual RTI matrix. We personalized it to us because I found when people go to California sums, it's overwhelming. They don't know where to start. So we wanted to make it smaller. We have now defined our quality first instructional essential components, and we are in the process of defining them so that we can operationalize them, right? So let's really define what we mean when we say designated ELD. What do I want to see? That will then be in conjunction with building our fidelity inventory so we can actually start to walk classrooms, not out of, I'm looking for the perfect this, but more that I'm actually understanding it's rooted in evidence-based practices. And then My big piece now is how do I tie that all together? And we're in the process of creating a comprehensive professional development plan. Those members of my team who have gone to more training say it should be a capacity building plan, because to really build capacity, you have to start with PD. I'm training you. You have to provide coaching and mentoring, which is the feedback part, and then you have to have a fidelity inventory. So those 3 stages are critical, and we find we do a really good job of PD. I can provide a workshop like no one else, but if I don't follow up with coaching and mentoring and feedback, then really me coming through an inventory or evaluating it is unfair, because I'm assuming that you're going to do it on your own. So what does that look like in a system of a school district? I think it has to be very intentional. So you have to choose your time, you have to choose your people, and you have to make sure that those things all converge at the right time at the right place. Because in the end, our goal is to lead and support the principals, because we know the principals support the teachers, because the teachers support the students. New learning for me has been when the system starts to break down is when someone in the organization by position tries to jump steps or jump levels. And I'll explain it to you like this. Or I'll ask the question. When teachers are meeting, who are they talking about? Students, right? They're talking about the principal because they're saying, man, if quality first instruction teacher, no, right? They're talking about who, right? They're collaborating around their students. When the principals come together, who should they be talking about? The teachers, right? They should be talking about what supports do the teachers need. When the district office, and especially say educational services comes together, who should they be talking about? Principals. But then when you do that, people say, well, now you're going to blame and shame, versus you're having true collaborative conversations around the needs of your individual learners, which for the district office is our principals. For the principals, it's the teachers. For the teachers, it's the students. If I spend my time trying to fix things at the student level, I am not honoring the different levels of the organization to do their work. And that takes time to get to that point, because you have to understand that you could go do it, right? Because I was really successful as a teacher. I was really successful as a principal. I was really successful as a director. And then you start to go, but wait, I need to make sure I cultivate those people where they're at so that they can become those great leaders in those positions. So that's my closing thought, because now that for me, I have the vision, right? It's much easier to build the pieces and then actually move through the stages of implementation where I can actually not just say, well, I know what's happening. I can actually show you the evidence and the data. So big ideas that I'll leave you with again, circling back, is about structure. Don't look at any times your CSI, ATSI, whatever the state changes it to down the line that it's a negative. Find out what those pieces are and work to build it into a commitment. Process. These procedures have to help people identify root cause, develop actions, and then provide services that's going to actually improve the data, because otherwise you're just doing things that are random. And then when you think of outcomes, it happens in stages. So first, do you know what you want to do? Now go out and measure, is it happening? Because at least if people are operating in the same way, the car is going to move forward. If the tires are all going different directions, it's not going to move very well. Then talk about quality, because I think that's the next step is, once I know I'm doing it well, I know now I can do it better. And then the last one is use your outcome data to make those decisions. Don't abandon too early, because the implementation science says that it should take 2 to 4 years to fully implement for non-complex systems. We are in an extremely complex system made up of a lot of feelings and people and non-factual information. They say expect at least 7 years to be able to actually fully implement. So I find we tend to abandon very quickly because we're still looking for something that's going to move it quicker. So just to encourage all of you to stick with it, especially when you can connect it back to your data, and then choose to adopt, adapt, or abandon. With that, I'll open it up for any questions, thoughts. I actually would love feedback from you as well, because what I don't get a lot of in my position is to share my thinking with new people. I'm constantly spending my time sharing my thinking with my ed services team, who tend to have their own thoughts and beliefs and opinions about me as their leader, just like you say, what are the teachers talking about? So it's always good to hear some authentic feedback outside of that, that I can take back and use to improve my professional practice.
I have a question, John.
Okay.
And then I give you feedback on your presentation.
Okay.
Then one of the challenges that I think Lisa and I tend to face, especially when we're working with a principal and then building their capacity then to take it to their school team, when we specifically ask the question, what is the vision for this for your school, or what is the vision for improving outcomes as related to your eligibility? It stumbles them sometimes, and then we find, oh, we have to backward and develop a vision. But what has been successful in helping your principal? Do you have that experience? And then what are some strategies to help with that vision?
For the first part of the question, absolutely. I run into that across the board, right? Because I think at the end of the day, I think many times, this is my opinion, right? As leaders, we've been successful in an environment where there was a level of maintaining the status quo, and the vision starts to become, well, I gotta keep things moving in that direction. I think where the challenge is how do you develop a vision that might be opposite of what the current organization or structure allows for? Because that's the piece that I want my conversation to be around. So most of the time, there's two things that I've found over the course of my career that help with that a little bit. The first is say, okay, you got all your data, know your data first of all. Now strip that all away. As ironic as that sounds, tell me what you want to improve, right? And when they start to go to a different place, for me, that's where I'm going to say, okay, now tell me how that relates to your data, because you're telling me that you want to fix something, which I'm trying to get you to your vision. But what you're wanting to fix is not, I can't build the bridge. So I want to build that bridge. So sometimes by getting out of the data head, people start to have a better time understanding what they're really wanting to create. And I think it morphs over time as well, and people need to be okay with that. You have to have an end in mind. The other one that I've given to principals that the feedback I've received that was helpful is I said, when you think of your vision, it should be, and this is, I'll see if I can go back to the slide super quick. It's a little ironic to me because it should be this, right? Is it evidence-based? Is it teachable, learnable, and doable? And if it's not, then really it is just this nebulous thing versus it's very tangible to something that we're trying to reach. And when I share with principals, I'll say, how do you reach a level where your vision happens if I bring a stranger to your campus and let them walk every single classroom, and when they come out, they tell you your vision, right? Like it should be that concrete to where it just is infused in your school. Like looking at your presentation, I imagine if I came and walked to your school as I went to steal you from Coachella Valley, your vision is eventually it's just going to be, I could take someone else that didn't see your presentation, doesn't know you, and they're going to come out and go, this is what's happening in the school. So that's the thinking I'm trying to get everybody to is it shows through actions, not through just telling people. It shows through day in and day out stuff that you see. Answer your question?
Yes.
Other questions, thoughts? I received someone from my team recently gave me feedback who said, so I'm using it because I want to make sure that you understand that when I say I'm open to feedback, I'm really honest. Because they said your title alone will automatically make people not think that you're a coach, you're wanting to coach them. I said, how do I break that apart, right? Because at the end of the day, if it was compliance, then that's, yes, the title falls in and then you start to, I'm going to evaluate you and all that stuff. But let's be truthful, this work is not going to move because of that. I've been in districts where that's the case, and just because someone tells me to do something, it's not happening. So it really is about moving into a we method. We have to do this together. So it's not about evaluating someone good or bad or even in or out of the system. To me, it's about helping make sure we're aligned in our thinking and we're moving together. Because if we're not, That's what breaks down time, is me having to spend all the time to say, why do you want to go over there and do that? When everything points, we should be over here doing this. So that's something that just in my current role, I really struggle with, because I've built a career on standing side by side and saying, well, we do this together. And then eventually your title starts to make people say, well, he's just making judgments. And that's a little bit of a balance that I'm trying to find. So I preface that to say, I would love any feedback you have of where we're at as a district. If something resonated with you, or if something, you're like, you might even be a little bit off.
I just have a question. So you mentioned that you had a few like outlier, people that were making some programs successful based on their talent, innate, abilities. So how does your plan address maybe schools where that wouldn't be the case, or are they all pretty much in the same, because like I said, I identified some resource inequities that is so unique to my area versus another. So what's good for this group may not apply to this, and it may not be in line. So how do you make sure that that's all going to be adequate for every site?
Yeah, it's twofold for me, and that's a great question. I'm going back to a slide to point it out. So first thing that we did is we did use our data to identify what those district level should be, because to me, and the county might have to plug their ears so they don't come back and tell me I did it wrong, but in the end, I kind of did both here. I created a supplemental resource that's in LCAP to address differentiated assistance, which is the MTSS specialist. And then I designed a Title I PD specialist, which is very targeted at a site level for them to focus on something smaller. And this first year, we used district data to drive that. I took in each of those positions, the successful intervention teachers that were doing things because of their own natural gift are somewhere on both those teams. In fact, I don't think any of them didn't land on one of those two teams, because I wanted their background and experience to help drive what the decisions should be in the system to move forward. So if you're a PD specialist, we have one who was doing intervention. She's actually a reading specialist. So that allows me to say, well, now you're going to be a resource to that team on the strategies that we're implementing for reading that are very intentional. So then that allows them to start to learn. Again, I want to build the capacity in each of them so they're not doing it rote, but that they're able to be dynamic in their environments, to be a resource to the principal to say, what we really need here is this. The aligning piece for me is literacy. Our district, right? You saw the data, and we have 11 of our 14 schools that are ATSI for the majority of our student groups. We have to be honest, the kids aren't reading. So my focus from the central office right now is we got to get kids reading, right? No matter what. And if that means that maybe there is a little time that's lost in some other areas, that's great, because I don't want a kid leaving any of my system, and if they can't read, there's already a disservice. And then the other side is the system. So to me, year one was you build it tight so that it's something that I know is working, and then year 2, 3, and beyond starts to become, I'm allowing for a lot more variance, but still within that structure, so that it's not, well, I want my PD specialist to go out and teach PE. No, reading, right?
I have another question to follow up with that now, and we are noticing several of our districts are focused on improving literacy outcomes, but as they are engaging in the root cause analysis and engaging in the inquiry around what is causing the challenges for students in literacy, we're finding it is due to lack of first best instruction, or lack of use of the core adopted curriculum, or lack of or increased access to something like very, very different resources teachers are pulling from.
Like teacher pay teacher.
Oh,
Yes. It's
don't get me
these are called
started.
the Wild Wild West.
Don't
And I'm
get
like,
me
well, we are in
started.
the West, so maybe it can be wild, but it's gotten so loose related to the variance of instructional materials. As you are making this shift in your system, how are teachers generally responding to this tightening of going back to first best instruction?
I think it's one of those things. I'm going to try to find my slide that connects to that. I think it works in this way for me. I find if I go and have the conversation, We all agree logically, cognitively, it's the right thing to do. And then it goes, but then I get in front of my kids again and I start thinking of all those other things. So for me, where I'm at my personal journey right now is that's why it's so important that I'm out there as much as I can and observing and collecting that information and not being, again, I don't want to jump levels. So I don't want to go and be the one that's giving the feedback to the teacher, but I need that information to be able to come back to the principals and basically say, yes, you have your data, you have your perspective, but here's what I'm seeing across the district so that there's that understanding of the why. What I find when I engage in conversation with individual teachers, like the PD specialists or the MTSS specialists, they're fully on board, right? They get it. We're stuck in the implementation. We're stuck in this part where we think we're over here in full implementation, but really we're still in exploration because we haven't really used the data to determine it. We're saying, I did a root cause and it's behavior. Kids can't behave. And I take it right back to this and then say, okay, so what's your clear description of what you expect at your school for behavior? Have you defined it? Right? I hear PBIS and I understand that, but I'm saying, is it concrete? Is it, right? Teachable, learnable, doable, and readily assessed. So have you defined the components? When we say we want every teacher at the door, this is what it looks like. It doesn't mean you're at your desk and your door's open. It means you're literally at your door, door's open, and you're fist bumping or high-fiving kids as they walk in. To me, it has to be technical and very concrete. Then you can operationalize it further, and then you can assess whether or not it's happening. So that's how, for me, I'm trying to engage in those conversations across our district.
I have a question. Thank you so much for sharing today. I'm deeply thinking about everything you've shared, so I really appreciate it. I really appreciate your QFI, quality for instruction. That's really great. I love the term. I love the QFI, and I love that it's an easy thing to communicate to all the teachers, right? And to really anchor them into what's important. Question is about how you see that fitting within the structure of improvement science. And one of the core principles is seeing the system that produces the results. Like if you don't make a change or if you don't innovate, you're always going to get the same results. And so how do we bring those two ideas together where we innovate and move toward an innovative change while still surrounding everyone with I hope that makes sense.
Makes perfect sense because the QFI, quality first instruction, is the foundation that has to happen before you can innovate, right? So think of it this way. If I'm Apple and I want to make my phone, I had to make a phone first before I could say I'm going to make a smartphone. And so I have to be able to say these things are happening, right? At what we would say is an acceptable level. Because I think what a lot of times people want to approach is they want everything to be exceptional, but we know that it's more about that consistency. So are my students getting at least a foundation consistently? Because then my data is going to be more accurate. So now I can say, okay, we know we're doing quality first instruction well, yet this is still a gap that's here. Now that's where you get into the improvement science of a Plan Do Study Act of let's start to talk about why, even though we're doing everything well, that's still not working out. Right now, what's happening is there's an assumption that's made that, well, our data shows that kids aren't successful, and so I need to go create an innovative thing to do. But we haven't confirmed that I've even provided what we know should be happening for students. Where I struggle in my position is because I can walk those classrooms and I can see major gaps, right? Of just in highly effective practice not occurring. So I know that in the end, I have to be able to provide capacity there to where people are doing that. And then to me, while doing that, I want to create a culture where they're coming back and saying, I get it, John, you wanted this done, we're doing it. This is still a gap in what's happening. Then it's now to say, okay, what does that look like? That turns the school plan for me into actually true innovation because I'm not just trying to buy a program or do more of the same. I'm actually really identifying that it's something that needs to be very specific. Did that answer your question?
I appreciate your answer.
When you're working with you said you're currently like defining those operational behaviors of what this first best instruction or high quality first best instruction, evidence-based instruction is looking like. As you're defining each of those elements for your content areas, are you immediately creating the success criteria for the fidelity assessment? So here's what it looks like. Here's how we assess. Here's what
Yes.
it looks like.
I mean, they go hand in hand next to each other, because otherwise what I'm doing, when I'm doing that, if I don't create what those essential components should look like and define how basically they're being measured, for me, I immediately start to fall into, well, I'm just going to provide PD that may or may not stick, right? To me, it'd be the same as starting a lesson where I'm going to say, here's my learning intention for the day, and I never tell you how you're going to show that you've learned it.
You're going to measure it on Smarter Balance.
Right. I'm gonna teach today and I'm gonna assess you in May, right? I mean, that's not the instructional model. So, you know, and those that have gone through NISL, really you connect back to how people learn, right? In the end, you have to have a structure for learning to occur, and you have to be able to actually have that feedback loop occurring, because otherwise I'm doing a great job, I think, but I don't have any evidence that really shows that it's correct. That's where that fidelity inventory becomes important, because again, I'm trying to measure first, are they doing it consistently? Second, are they doing it consistently with quality? And then third, can I connect it now to an outcome that shows I was actually doing this, I was doing it well, and that's why I know my data has increased. Other thoughts? Did it resonate with everybody? I'll leave with this, very imperfect. I think that's what makes education exciting, is it's not always a script, but I think if we really, you know, I heard a principal say to me recently, she said, I want to be able to share with my staff that the level of instruction I want in every classroom is an environment where I'd put my own child. How many of you have heard somebody say that or have said it yourself? And I said, well, what do you mean? Right? That's an opinion. That's an opinion that's based off of what I think is great in a classroom